The pen felt heavier than it should have. That's the thing nobody tells you about signing divorce papers, the physical weight of the moment. My hand was steady, which surprised me. 18 years, and my hand didn't shake even once as I wrote my name across the bottom of that last page. Renee Calloway, formerly Renee Holt, sitting at a scratched-up table in my divorce attorney's office on a gray February afternoon in a gray city that had been slowly dying since the steel mills closed. The sleet was hitting the window sideways. I remember that specifically. I remember thinking the weather was at least being honest about things. Marcus didn't even wait for the ink to dry. I found out later, 3 days later, from his cousin Devin, who felt guilty enough to text me, that Marcus had a flight booked for the following morning, Las Vegas. He and Sienna had reservations at some hotel on the Strip. While I was driving my beat-up Chevy Silverado back to the house we'd shared for 14 years, loading the last of my things into cardboard boxes, Marcus was already packing a carry-on and probably humming to himself. That image sat in my chest like a wrench lodged in an engine block, just wedged there, cold and immovable. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up, because to understand what happened after, what his doctor said, what it meant, and why I felt the way I did when I heard it, you need to understand what 18 years actually looked like from the inside. I grew up in Harwick, Pennsylvania. If you've never heard of it, that's exactly right. It used to be a real place, a place with a purpose. My grandfather worked at the foundry on the east side of town. My dad worked at the auto plant on Route 9 until it closed when I was 12, and then he worked at a garage on Clement Street until he retired. That's where I learned everything I know. I started handing him tools when I was 9 years old, standing on a step stool to reach over the hood, and by the time I was 16, I could rebuild a carburetor from scratch. I became a certified mechanic at 22. I was the only woman in my program at the vocational school, and I graduated second in my class. I took a job at Kowalski's Auto on the north end of town, worked my way up to lead technician, and by 35 I was managing the shop floor and doing diagnostics that the younger guys couldn't figure out. The owner, Pete Kowalski, used to say I had a gift for listening to engines. He meant it as a compliment. I took it as one. I was 40 when I signed those papers. 40 years old, with grease permanently embedded in the creases of my knuckles, and a marriage that had been slowly seizing up like an engine running without oil for the last 4 years. I met Marcus when I was 21 and he was 24. He came into the shop with a failing alternator on a 2003 Dodge Ram and an attitude like he knew more about it than I did. He didn't. I told him what was wrong in about 6 minutes, and he spent the next 2 weeks finding reasons to come back. I thought it was charming. My friend Dorothy Marsh, who I've known since 7th grade, told me at the time, "Renee, that man is used to getting what he wants." I laughed at her. I was 21. Laughing at good advice is basically a job requirement at that age. We got married in March of 2006 on a cold, bright Saturday at the courthouse downtown, with Dottie as my witness and Marcus's brother Clifton as his. No big wedding. Neither of us wanted the fuss. We had a dinner afterward at Carlucci's on 5th Street, and Marcus gave a little toast that made me cry. And I thought, this is it. This is the person I'm going to figure out the rest of my life with. For a long time, that felt true. Marcus worked in sales, medical equipment, the kind of mid-tier stuff that hospitals bought in bulk. He was good at it because he was genuinely likable when he wanted to be. Easy laugh, good memory for names and details. He remembered what people told him about their kids, their vacations, their small complaints, and he'd bring it up 3 months later like it was the most natural thing in the world. People felt seen by him. I understand why. I felt that way too, for years. We bought our house on Delwood Avenue in 2009, right after the market crashed, and the prices dropped enough that 2 working people without family money could actually afford something decent. 3 bedrooms, a 1-car garage, which I converted into a proper 2-bay workshop within 18 months, and a backyard with a rusted swing set left by the previous owners that we never quite got around to taking down. No kids. That was a decision we made together, or at least I thought we did. Marcus said he was fine with it. He said he was glad we had the freedom. I believed him, the same way I believed a lot of things he said. The house was mine in the settlement. That was one thing Marcus didn't fight for, maybe because he knew I'd poured more sweat equity into it than he ever had. I'd re-insulated the attic myself in the summer of 2015. I'd torn out and replaced the subfloor in the master bathroom. I'd rewired 2 rooms when we found out the previous owner had done some creative electrical work that was slowly becoming a fire hazard. Marcus's contribution to the house was mostly choosing the paint colors and complaining about the neighbor's leaf blower. I don't say that to be mean, it's just accurate. The marriage didn't end all at once. It ended the way an engine fails when it's been neglected too long. Not a dramatic explosion, just a slow accumulation of damage, until one day, something gives and the whole thing locks up. I could feel it happening for years before I admitted it to myself. The conversations that used to run until 2 in the morning, shrinking down to logistics. The way he stopped asking about my day with any actual curiosity. The trips he took for work that stretched longer and longer, with explanations that were technically plausible, but carried a particular quality of smoothness, like something rehearsed. I didn't suspect Sienna specifically until January of last year. I found out by accident, the way you usually find out, not through dramatic detective work, but through a stupid, small mistake. Marcus left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while he went to take a shower. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a pen. The screen was right there, and the name Sienna was right there in a message thread, and the content of those messages was not ambiguous in any way. She was 26. Marcus was 43. She worked at one of the hospital groups he serviced. I stood in my own kitchen in my socks on a Thursday evening and read enough to understand the full shape of what I was looking at, and then I walked to the garage and sat on the concrete floor next to my toolbox for about 45 minutes, doing nothing. I didn't cry right away. That surprised me about myself. The divorce took just over 13 months from the moment I told Marcus I knew. He didn't deny it. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Renee, I didn't want it to happen this way." And I remember thinking that was the most useless sentence a human being had ever constructed. We tried 2 sessions with a couples counselor named Dr. Patricia Webb, who had a very soothing office and a very tired expression. And by the second session, it was clear that Marcus wasn't trying to save anything. He was going through the motions. Sienna was already the plan. I hired an attorney named Carolyn Fitch. She was 58, no nonsense, and had handled enough divorces in Harwick to know every trick in the book. She got me the house, half the 401k, and a clean split on the joint accounts. Marcus's attorney pushed back on the retirement account, but Carolyn pushed harder. The final number on my half of his 401k came to a little under $94,000. Marcus kept his company car and his commission pipeline, and what I can only assume was a significant amount of self-satisfaction. He signed his papers 2 days before I signed mine, and then it was February, and the sleet was coming in sideways, and I was putting my name on the last page of the document that officially ended the 18 years I had given to that man, and my hand was completely steady, and I didn't understand yet whether that meant I was strong or whether it meant I had already gone numb somewhere I couldn't feel. I drove home to Delwood Avenue. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table alone and listened to the sleet hitting the windows and the sound of the old furnace cycling on and off, and the house felt enormous in a way it never had before, even though I had lived in it for 15 years and knew every creak in every floorboard. My phone buzzed, a text from Dottie. "How are you holding up? I can come over." I typed back, "I'm okay. I'll call you tomorrow." I wasn't okay. But I wasn't not okay in a way I could explain yet. I was just sitting inside the fact of it, the way you sit inside a car that's stopped working, not panicking, just assessing, figuring out what you have and what you're going to need. I didn't hear from Marcus that night, or the next day. Devin's text came on the 3rd day. He said he was sorry. He said Marcus and Sienna had flown out the morning after the papers were filed. He said he thought I deserved to know, and that Marcus had told the family they were taking a little celebration trip. That word, celebration, landed somewhere in my chest and just sat there, burning at a low, steady temperature. I was 40 years old, alone in a house in a dying industrial city in the middle of February, and the man I had spent half my life with was celebrating. I put my phone face down on the table, and then, about 48 hours after that, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. A 412 area code, local. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me answer. "Is this Renee Calloway?" The voice was professional, measured, a man somewhere in his 50s by the sound of it. "I'm calling from Allegheny Regional Medical Center. I'm Dr. Samuel Okafor. I'm Marcus Holt's oncologist." I gripped the edge of the kitchen table. "I apologize for the direct call," he said. "I understand the situation is complicated, but I need to make sure you're aware that as of the finalization of your divorce, you are no longer listed as an emergency contact or authorized party for Mr. Holt's treatment. I wanted to confirm that directly with you, given that you were previously the primary contact for all communications regarding his care." I sat very still. "His care," I said slowly. "What care, exactly?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Calloway," Dr. Okafor said carefully, "you weren't aware that Mr. Holt has been under our care for the past 7 months." The sleet had stopped. The house was completely silent. I could hear my own breathing. "No," I said. "I was not aware of that." There was a long silence on the line. Dr. Okafor filled it carefully. "I see," he said. "Mrs. Calloway, I want to be very clear that I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics of Mr. Holt's medical situation with you. You are no longer an authorized party. The reason I'm calling is simply administrative, to confirm that you've been removed from his contact list and to make sure you weren't expecting any further communications from our office regarding his care." 7 months, I said. My voice came out flat, which wasn't how I felt. "You said 7 months." "That's as much as I can confirm. I'm sorry for the intrusion. I just wanted to make sure there was no confusion on your end." He was polite, professional, the kind of doctor who learned how to deliver hard information without delivering it. I could tell he was choosing every word with the precision of someone walking across ice. "Is he going to be okay?" I asked. The question surprised me as it came out. I wasn't sure I meant to say it. Another pause, longer this time. "I'm not able to share that information," Dr. Okafor said quietly. "I'm sorry." He ended the call. I sat at the kitchen table holding the phone with both hands, staring at the black screen until it went dark. 7 months. Marcus had been sick for 7 months. That meant he'd been sick since July. Last July, when we were still technically married, still sleeping in the same house, on opposite sides of a king-sized bed that had started to feel like a continent, but still the same house. He'd been driving to appointments at Allegheny Regional Medical Center, and he hadn't said a word. Not one word. Not even toward the end, when Carolyn Fitch's office was sending paperwork back and forth, and we were dividing up the 401k and arguing about the truck. Not even then did he mention it. I thought about Sienna, 26 years old, booking a hotel on the Vegas Strip, celebrating. Did she know? Was she the one sitting in the waiting room at the oncology department? Was she listed on the forms now, in the space where my name used to be? I put the phone face down again. Then I picked it up and called Dottie. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, I was just thinking about you. How are you?" "Marcus has cancer," I said. Silence. "Dot." "I'm here," she said. "I'm here. How do you know?" I told her about Dr. Okafor, about the 7 months, about the fact that I had apparently been the primary emergency contact for a man who was secretly receiving cancer treatment while simultaneously finalizing our divorce and booking flights to Nevada with a 26-year-old. "Oh my God," Dottie said, very softly. "Yeah." "Renee, what kind of cancer? Did he say?" "He wouldn't tell me anything. I'm not authorized anymore." I laughed. It came out wrong, too sharp, too close to something that wasn't actually funny at all. "I'm off the list." Dottie was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her thinking through the phone. "That's a real thing, with people you've known since 7th grade. You can hear the quality of their silence." "Do you want to know?" she finally asked. "I don't know what I want." "That's an answer," she said. I slept maybe 3 hours that night. I lay in the dark in the bedroom on Delwood Avenue and stared at the ceiling and tried to organize my thoughts the same way I'd organize a complicated diagnostic. Start with what I know, eliminate what I can rule out, work toward what I can't explain. What I knew was Marcus was sick. He'd been sick for 7 months and had hidden it from me through the entire back half of our divorce proceedings. He had then signed his papers, and I had signed mine, and he had flown to Vegas, and I had gone off the authorized contacts list. And now his doctor was calling to make sure I wasn't waiting for updates that were never going to come. What I couldn't explain was why. Why hide it from me? We were already done. The marriage was already over. He wasn't protecting anything by the time July rolled around. We'd already told each other the worst things people can say during a divorce. What did he gain by keeping this from me for 7 months? The answer I kept landing on, the one I didn't want to sit with, was this. He didn't hide it from me because of the divorce. He hid it because telling me would have made him need me, and needing me didn't fit the version of himself he was building. The version that had Sienna and Vegas and a celebration trip and a fresh start. You can't celebrate if you're also sick and scared and reaching for your wife's hand in a waiting room. So he chose not to be that person. He just decided not to be. By morning, I had moved through something. I can't call it grief exactly. It was more like the feeling after you've taken an engine completely apart and laid out all the pieces on the garage floor, the moment before you start figuring out what's salvageable. A cold, clear inventory. I got up, made coffee, and called Carolyn Fitch's office at 8:15. Her assistant, a young man named Trevor who has the patient tone of someone who dealt with upset people all day, told me Carolyn had a cancellation at 10:30. I took it. "What exactly are you asking me?" Carolyn said, sitting across her desk from me with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a legal pad in front of her. She was the kind of woman who made you feel like being imprecise was a moral failing. "I want to know if there's any legal significance," I said. "He was sick during the divorce. He hid it. Does that change anything about the settlement?" Carolyn wrote something on her pad. "What kind of sick are we talking?" "He's been seeing an oncologist at Allegheny Regional for 7 months. The doctor called to tell me I'd been removed from the contact list. He wouldn't confirm the diagnosis." She wrote more. "And you had no knowledge of this during the proceedings. None. Zero." She set her pen down. "Renee, I need to be direct with you. In Pennsylvania, a spouse's health condition isn't generally considered a material disclosure requirement in divorce proceedings. He wasn't legally obligated to tell you. The equitable distribution analysis is about assets, not medical status." She paused. "However," I looked at her. "However," she said again, slower, "if his illness affects his ability to pay, say if he goes on medical leave, loses his commission income, has significant treatment costs, that could be relevant to any support arrangements. But you didn't take alimony. No. You took the house, the 401k split, the joint accounts. Clean break." She folded her hands. "So legally, you're probably where you are." "Probably. There are angles worth examining. If he was already diagnosed when he was negotiating the retirement account split, and the illness will significantly impact his life expectancy or earning capacity, there could be an argument that material facts were being withheld, but that's a stretch, and it would be expensive to pursue." I sat with that. "I'm not trying to get more money," I said. "I just want to understand what happened." Carolyn looked at me for a long moment. She had the practiced, neutral expression of someone who'd heard 1,000 people say things they only half meant, and she was deciding which category I fell into. "What happened," she said carefully, "is that your husband got sick and chose not to tell you. That's not a legal matter. That's a personal one." She was right. I knew she was right before she said it. I paid for the consultation, $180 for 45 minutes, and drove back to Delwood Avenue in the Silverado, and I sat in the driveway for a while without going inside. Here's what I didn't tell Carolyn, because I wasn't sure what to do with it yet. The day before the call from Dr. Okafor, I had received a piece of mail addressed to Marcus that I'd set on the kitchen counter without opening. I hadn't opened it because it wasn't my business, and I'd been very deliberate about not touching anything that wasn't mine since the papers were signed. But after the call, I'd looked at it more carefully. The return address was Allegheny Regional Medical Center, billing department. I had not opened it. It was still sitting on the counter. I didn't have the legal right to open Marcus's mail. I knew that. But I also knew that the envelope contained a number, a dollar amount, and that number would tell me something about what Marcus was actually facing. How serious, how expensive, how much of what he'd done in those final months of our marriage had been shaped by something he'd never let me see. I went inside. I stood in front of the kitchen counter and looked at the envelope for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called Devin. Marcus's cousin answered on the fourth ring, sounding cautious. He knew why I might be calling. I could hear it in the half-second delay before he said hello. "Devin," I said, "I need you to tell me what you know." "Renee, I'm not angry at you. I know you texted me because you thought it was the right thing. I'm asking you to keep doing the right thing. Did you know he was sick?" A long pause, long enough that I had my answer before he said a word. "I found out in September," Devin said finally. "He made me promise not to say anything. Renee, I wanted to tell you. I almost called you like 4 times. "What is it?" I asked. "What does he have?" "Pancreatic," Devin said. "Stage 3. I put my hand flat on the kitchen counter. "He found out in July," Devin continued, his voice low and miserable. "He said he didn't want it to affect the divorce. He said he didn't want, his words were, he didn't want you to stay out of pity. He said he needed a clean break or he couldn't handle it." I stood very still, processing that. Marcus had been diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer in July. He had hidden it through 6 months of divorce proceedings because he didn't want me to stay out of pity. And then he had signed the papers and flown to Vegas with a 26-year-old and called it a celebration. I thought about that for a long time, about what it meant, about what he'd actually been thinking in that oncologist's office in July when the doctor told him the words, when the thing that no one ever believes will happen to them actually happened. Whether Sienna had been there, whether he'd cried, whether he'd thought about me, whether he still thought about me. "Devin," I said, "is he back from Vegas?" Another pause. "Yeah, they got back 2 days ago." "Okay," I said. "Renee, what are you going to do?" I looked at the envelope on the counter. I looked out the window at the driveway, at the Silverado, at the gray February sky that had finally stopped throwing sleet at everything and was just sitting there, cold and still and waiting. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm going to do something." I spent the next 3 days doing something Marcus never expected me to do. Nothing. No dramatic phone calls. No showing up at wherever he and Sienna had landed. No messages to his family. No posts. No signals that I'd been told anything at all. I went to work at Kowalski's. I changed the oil on a fleet of delivery vans, diagnosed a persistent misfire on a 2018 F-150, and ate my lunch sitting on an overturned crate in the back bay, the same way I had for 15 years. I let the routine hold me up, the way routine does when everything else has gone structurally unsound. What I was actually doing, beneath the surface of all that ordinary motion, was thinking. Devin called me on the 4th day. "Marcus wants to talk to you," he said. He sounded uncomfortable about being the messenger, which was fair because I hadn't asked him to be one. "Does he?" I said. "He knows I told you. About everything. He's not angry, he just—" Devin paused. "He says he needs to explain it himself." I thought about that. Marcus needing to explain himself was not a new phenomenon. Marcus had always had an explanation for everything, smooth, plausible, assembled on short notice with the confidence of a man who had spent his career selling things to people who weren't sure they wanted them. The explanation for working late. The explanation for the weekend in Columbus that turned out not to be a work conference. The explanation for Sienna eventually, which hadn't been an explanation at all but rather a confession dressed up as an apology. "Tell him to call me," I said. "Not through you, directly." Marcus called that evening at 7:15. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and I let the phone ring 4 times before I picked up. Renee. His voice was different. Not the Marcus on a sales call voice, not even the Marcus having a hard conversation voice I'd come to know during the divorce. This was something underneath all of that, quieter, like something had been removed. "Marcus," I said, "I know Devin told you. He didn't say he was angry about it. I was going to tell you myself. I didn't know how to do it without it turning into something it wasn't supposed to be." "Something like what?" "Like you feeling obligated." He said it fast, like he'd rehearsed it. "Like you staying, or coming back, or—" "I didn't want that. I knew you'd do it because that's who you are, and I didn't want the last year of my marriage to be you staying out of—" "Marcus," I kept my voice level. "Stop for a second." He stopped. "You had stage 3 pancreatic cancer in July," I said, "while we were still married, while we were sitting across from each other at that kitchen table going through the retirement accounts, and you didn't tell me. I want you to say out loud that that's what happened." A long pause. "That's what happened," he said. "Okay." I wrapped my hands around the cold coffee mug. "I'm not going to yell at you about it. I've had a week to sit with it, and I've moved past the part where I'd yell. But I want you to hear me clearly. You made a decision for both of us. You decided I couldn't be trusted to handle information about your health with any kind of dignity. You decided the version of me in your head, the one who'd stay out of pity, was more real than the actual me. And you built the last 6 months of our marriage on top of that decision, and you never once checked whether you were right." Silence on the line. "I may have been right," he said finally, quietly, not defensive, just honest, in the way people sometimes get when they're running low on the energy it takes to be anything else. "You don't know that," I said, "because you never asked." Another silence, longer. "How bad is it?" I asked. He took a breath. "Stage 3 means it hasn't spread to distant organs. That's the good news. The bad news is the tumor's position. They can't get clean margins surgically, so it's chemo and radiation and— there's a clinical trial at UPMC that Dr. Okafor wants me in. Gemcitabine-based combination therapy, started in August." He knew the terminology precisely. He'd been living inside this information for 7 months. He'd learned it the way you learn anything that becomes your whole world, whether you want it to or not. "Is Sienna there?" I asked, not accusatory, just a question. Yes, she's been helping. She comes to appointments." He paused. "She's trying." I thought about Sienna, 26 years old, sitting in an oncology waiting room at Allegheny Regional, with a magazine she probably wasn't reading, trying. That image was complicated in ways I wasn't going to work out on a phone call. "Marcus," I said, "I have something to say, and I want you to just listen to it." "Okay." "I spent 18 years building a life with you. Most of it was real. Most of it I don't regret. When you got sick in July, the right thing, the thing I would have done, the thing you knew I would have done, was stand next to you. Not out of pity, because that's what 18 years means. You took that away from both of us when you decided to protect me from knowing." I stopped. Let that sit. "I'm not asking for anything back. The divorce is done and it should stay done. But I needed you to know that what you hid from me wasn't just a medical diagnosis. It was a chance I never got." I could hear his breathing on the other end, slow and deliberate, the way people breathe when they're trying not to come apart in a way that embarrasses them. "I know," he said. It was only 2 words, but they came out like something that had been waiting a long time to be put down. We didn't talk much longer after that. There wasn't more to say that the moment could hold. He told me he had another round of treatment scheduled for the following week. I told him I hoped it went well, and I meant it with the particular cleanness of meaning something, without wanting anything in return. After I hung up, I sat at the table for a long time. Then I stood up, poured the cold coffee down the sink, and made a fresh cup. The envelope from Allegheny Regional Billing was still on the counter. I looked at it. Then I picked it up and walked it to the front door and set it on the porch railing, so I'd remember to redirect Marcus's mail properly. I had his new address. Devin had texted it to me weeks ago, practical and unsentimental. I wrote it on a sticky note and put it in my purse. That was the last time Marcus's name lived in my kitchen. Dottie came over on Saturday. She brought a rotisserie chicken and a bottle of red wine that wasn't fancy, but wasn't terrible either. And we sat at the kitchen table and ate off paper plates, because I hadn't felt like doing dishes all week, and I was tired of pretending otherwise. "So," she said, tearing a piece of bread, "how are you actually doing?" "I talked to him," I said, "on the phone, 4 nights ago." She put the bread down. "And?" "And he's scared," I said. "He's been scared for 7 months, alone in the way you're alone when you've decided the person who knows you best isn't allowed to know. He made a choice that I think he thought was generous, and it turned out to be just another form of control. I don't think he meant it that way. I think he genuinely believed he was protecting me." I picked up my wine. "But the thing about Marcus is that he always believed he was doing the right thing. That was never the part I could argue with. It was the part I couldn't live with." Dottie was quiet for a moment. "Do you still love him?" I thought about it. Really thought. The way you do when the person asking has known you long enough to catch you in a shortcut answer. "I love who he was at Carlucci's on 5th Street in 2006, I said. "I love the version of him that remembered what people told him and made them feel seen. I love the man who handed me a coffee at 7 in the morning without being asked for 14 years. I set down my glass. But that's not the same as being in love with the man who existed by the end. Those are different things. And I think I spent too long trying to pretend they were the same person." Dottie nodded. She didn't add anything, which was exactly right. Spring came to Harwick the way it always did, reluctantly, in fits and starts, the temperature climbing and then dropping back down like it couldn't quite commit. By April, there were crocuses coming up along the front walk that I hadn't planted and didn't remember being there before. Maybe they'd always been there and I'd just never had occasion to notice them. I re-insulated the garage in March, a project I'd been putting off since the previous fall. I ordered a proper hydraulic lift through a trade supplier Pete Kowalski knew, and got it installed by 2 guys from a shop in Pittsburgh who charged a fair price and did clean work. The workshop on Delwood Avenue was genuinely good now, better than it had been. I started taking private repair jobs on evenings and weekends, mostly older vehicles that people wanted maintained properly rather than flipped. A 71 Chevelle, a 68 Ford Bronco with a rebuilt engine that needed sorting, a Professor 944 that belonged to a retired professor in the north end of town who drove it 3 months a year and worried about it constantly the other 9. The work was satisfying in a way that was hard to explain to people who hadn't grown up with their hands in an engine, the particular completeness of a problem you can see, locate, and fix. Devin texted me in May. Marcus had completed the first phase of treatment. The tumor had responded. Dr. Okafor was cautiously optimistic about the clinical trial data. Devin said Marcus had asked him to tell me, which I thought was a careful, considered thing to do. Not a call, not a direct message, just an acknowledgement that I might want to know without requiring me to respond. I texted back, "Thanks for letting me know. I'm glad." I was glad. That was the truth of it. Not complicated. Not tangled up in the rest of it, just glad. The house on Delwood Avenue stopped feeling enormous somewhere around June. I can't point to the exact day, but one morning I came downstairs and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching a pair of mourning doves work over the backyard, and the space around me felt like mine. Not like a remainder, not like what was left after something was taken, like a place I had chosen and built and was still choosing, with the workshop out back and the crocuses out front, and the floorboards I'd replaced myself, and the attic I'd insulated with my own 2 hands while Marcus complained about the heat. I hadn't rebuilt anything the way a movie would have you believe people rebuild. No single dramatic moment, no morning I woke up transformed, just the accumulated weight of ordinary days, each one a little more mine than the one before. I turned 41 in September. Dottie took me to a restaurant in Pittsburgh I'd never been to, and we ate too much and stayed too late, and drove home on the interstate with the windows cracked, even though it was almost cold enough not to, because the night air felt like something worth keeping. On the drive back, she said, "You seem different." "Different how?" She thought about it. Like you stopped waiting for something. I looked at the road ahead, the headlights, the dark beyond them, the familiar highway markers for exits I'd been reading since I was a kid. "I think I did," I said. That was it. That was the whole of what had shifted. 18 years I had been in a marriage that asked me to wait, for Marcus to come home, for Marcus to stop traveling, for Marcus to notice, for Marcus to choose the thing we had over the thing he wanted instead. And then 13 months of divorce proceedings that asked me to wait for it to be over. And then a phone call from an oncologist that asked me to sit with something enormous and do nothing with it. All of that waiting, and then it was done, and the waiting was done with it. I had the house, I had the workshop, I had Dottie and Pete Kowalski, and a '68 Bronco that was finally running right. I had my name on the deed and my skills in my hands, and 39 more working years ahead of me, more or less, if I was lucky and careful. The last thing I heard about Marcus came in November, from Devon, a short text. Second round of imaging showed reduction, still in the trial.